poison was already inside. The poison was already inside the emperor. It was the last night of the year, in 192 AD, and Commodus believed he would wake the next morning to begin a new chapter of his reign. According to the historian Herodian, his favorite companion, Marcia, had mixed poison into his wine. But then Commodus began to vomit. The conspirators understood what that meant. If the emperor recovered, he would not simply punish them. He would erase them, their families, and anyone who had known about the plot. So they abandoned poison and sent for Narcissus, a powerful athlete who trained with the emperor. Narcissus entered the room, seized Commodus by the throat, and finished what the poison had failed to do. The most powerful man in the Roman world had survived the cup placed in front of him, only to be killed by someone he trusted enough to practice wrestling with. That contradiction explains almost every assassination in this story. A Roman emperor could command armies across 3 continents, but he still had to trust the servant preparing his dinner, the guard opening his door, and the officer standing behind him. And no, this story does not begin with Julius Caesar. It begins after Rome had transformed one-man rule into a permanent imperial system and discovered that it had no permanent system for removing the man at the top. The first emperor in this story was Gaius, better known by the childhood nickname Caligula. Later Roman writers remembered Caligula as a deranged tyrant. Some of their most famous stories were written after his death by authors who had every reason to make him look monstrous. But whatever has been exaggerated, Caligula clearly alienated senators, wealthy Romans, and eventually members of his own guard. One officer had a particularly personal grievance. Cassius Chaerea was a senior tribune of the Praetorian Guard. Ancient accounts claim that Caligula repeatedly humiliated him with insulting watchwords and jokes about his masculinity. Chaerea was not the only conspirator, but he became the man at the center of the plot. On January 24, 41 AD, Caligula left a performance during the Palatine Games and entered a covered passage beneath the palace complex. The space was narrow. His larger escort was separated from him. Men who were supposed to protect the emperor closed around him instead. Chaerea struck first. Other conspirators joined the attack, and Caligula was killed before loyal guards could reach him. His wife and young daughter were also murdered in the violence that followed. Then came the part that mattered most for Rome. The Praetorians found Caligula's uncle Claudius inside the palace and proclaimed him emperor. The Senate debated restoring the Republic, but the guards already had their candidate. Rome had learned 2 lessons in a single afternoon. An emperor could be murdered by his own protection, and the men holding the swords could help choose who replaced him. Before we continue, my name is Noah. We built this channel for people who want the full story behind history's most infamous figures, not just the version that survived in legend. If that sounds like you, subscribe. It's free and it helps us make better videos more than you might think. All right, back to Rome. Claudius ruled for 13 years and proved far more capable than many had expected. But in 54 AD, he died shortly before his stepson Nero took the throne. The famous story says that Claudius was poisoned by his wife Agrippina, who wanted to secure the succession for her son before Claudius could favor his biological son, Britannicus. Tacitus and other ancient writers placed the poison in a dish of mushrooms. Some versions even added a second dose when the first failed. But this murder is not certain. Modern scholars have proposed poisoning, illness, stroke, and other natural causes. The mushroom story may be true, partly true, or political suspicion hardened into fact after Nero became emperor. What matters is that Romans found it believable. The ruler of millions still had to eat what his household placed before him, and the son who benefited from Claudius's death would produce the biggest contradiction in this video. The most infamous emperor in Roman history was not murdered at all. Nero's reputation is filled with fire, executions, extravagance, and stories shaped by hostile elite sources, but his fall did not begin with an assassin entering the palace. It began when provincial revolts convinced Rome's armies that another emperor was possible. In 68 AD, support collapsed with extraordinary speed. Governors rebelled. The Senate turned against him. The Praetorian Guard abandoned him after its prefect was promised rewards by Nero's enemies. Nero fled Rome with only a few attendants and hid in a villa outside the city. When he learned that he had been declared a public enemy, he understood what capture would mean. He tried to take his own life, but hesitated. Finally, his freedman, Epaphroditus, helped guide the blade. Nero was not physically overpowered by conspirators. He was politically stripped of every layer that had made him emperor, until suicide became the last decision still under his control. His death ended the Julio-Claudian dynasty and opened the year of the four emperors. Generals and legions now fought over the throne. Rome eventually recovered under the Flavian dynasty, but its third Flavian emperor, Domitian, ended in another bedroom conspiracy. Domitian was not simply the mad villain his senatorial enemies described. He was an energetic administrator, strengthened frontier defenses, and kept close control over government. He also concentrated power, punished opponents, and created an atmosphere in which members of his own household feared they might be next. In 96 AD, court officials began planning his death. According to Suetonius, a steward named Stephanus pretended to have an injured arm. For several days he wore thick bandages. Hidden inside them was a dagger. Stephanus gained a private audience by claiming he had discovered a conspiracy. He handed Domitian a document, waited until the emperor began reading, and stabbed him. Domitian fought back. He called for the weapon normally kept beneath his pillow, but the blade had already been removed. The doors had been closed. More attackers entered, and the emperor was killed inside the room from which he ruled the empire. Within hours, the Senate recognized Nerva as his successor. The pattern was becoming clearer. Emperors were not dying because Rome possessed a lawful mechanism for judging bad rulers. They were dying when the people closest to them decided that another ruler offered better odds. Then came Commodus. He was the son of Marcus Aurelius, born into the dynasty rather than adopted for ability. Ancient writers accused him of cruelty, paranoia, and allowing favorites to dominate government. He presented himself as a new Hercules and fought staged contests in the arena, a spectacle many senators considered humiliating for an emperor. By the final day of 192, Marcia, the Praetorian prefect Latus, and the chamberlain Eclectus believed they were marked for death. So came the poisoned wine, the vomiting, and Narcissus. Commodus was dead, but killing him had been the easy part. Replacing him would prove far more dangerous. The conspirators installed Pertinax, a respected senator and former general. He tried to restore discipline and control spending. The Praetorian Guard disliked both ideas. After only 86 days, guards broke into the palace and murdered him. The killing was so sudden that Pertinax reportedly tried to reason with the men who had come for him. It did not matter. Discipline had threatened their privileges, and the emperor no longer had enough loyal force between himself and their anger. Then the unit created to protect the emperor effectively offered its support to the highest bidder. Didius Julianus won the bargain by promising an enormous payment to every guardsman. Rome obeyed. The provincial armies did not. 3 commanders claimed the throne. Their legions marched, Julianus was executed, and the empire entered another civil war. The Praetorians could sell the palace, but they could not sell the provinces. Commodus's murder had not repaired the imperial system. It had exposed who could sell it. The winner of that civil war, Septimius Severus, built his power more openly on the army. His son Caracalla understood the lesson and lavished money on the soldiers. It still did not save him. Caracalla had murdered his own brother Geta during a meeting in the imperial palace, then tried to erase Geta's name and image from public memory. He carried out brutal reprisals against suspected enemies and cultivated the army with higher pay and privileges. By 217 AD, he was campaigning in the east, surrounded by troops whose loyalty he believed he had purchased. His Praetorian prefect, Macrinus, had reason to fear him. Reports connected Macrinus with predictions that he would become emperor. In a court where suspicion could become a death sentence, waiting was dangerous. On April 8th, while traveling between Edessa and Carhagen, Caracalla stopped beside the road to relieve himself. His attendants moved away to give him privacy. That brief moment removed the wall around him. A guard officer named Iulius Marcialis approached and stabbed him from behind. Ancient accounts disagree over the precise details in Macrinus's role, but they agree on the humiliation at the center of the scene. Caracalla was not killed in a great battle. He was killed during the few seconds when an emperor expected everyone nearby to look away. Martialis was cut down as he fled. Macrinus became emperor soon afterwards. But he lasted barely a year because the army could create an emperor faster than Rome could legitimize one. The next ruler was a Syrian teenager remembered as Elagabalus. Few imperial reputations are harder to separate from hostile storytelling. Roman authors filled his reign with sexual scandal, religious outrage, and deliberate shock. Some accusations are impossible to verify. The political conflict is clearer. Elagabalus promoted the Syrian sun god whose priest he had been and placed the cult at the center of imperial life. Many Romans saw this as an attack on tradition. His grandmother, Julia Maesa, understood that outrage inside the capital was becoming a threat to the dynasty itself. She helped elevate Elagabalus's younger cousin, Alexander, as a safer alternative. More importantly, the Praetorian Guard began to prefer him. Elagabalus adopted Alexander, then reportedly tried to remove him when the younger prince became too popular. The attempt only confirmed the Guard's suspicions. In March of 222 AD, Elagabalus went to the Praetorian camp with his mother, Julia Soaemias, hoping to regain control. Instead, the troops turned on them. Mother and son were killed. Elagabalus was only 18. His body was dragged through Rome and thrown into the Tiber, while Alexander was proclaimed emperor. The Guard had not merely removed a ruler, it had selected the replacement in advance. Alexander survived for 13 years by presenting a calmer image and relying heavily on advisors. But when soldiers on the Rhine believed he was too willing to negotiate with Germanic enemies, they murdered him and his mother. They raised a career soldier named Maximinus to the throne. Maximinus, later called Thrax, was the first emperor to rise from the army without belonging to the senatorial or equestrian elite. He spent his entire reign on campaign and never entered Rome. His strength was military loyalty. That was also his only real protection. In 238 AD, revolt spread from Africa to the Senate. Rome recognized rival emperors, and the empire briefly seemed to be producing claimants faster than it could eliminate them. Maximinus marched into Italy to crush the rebellion, but the city of Aquileia closed its gates. The siege stalled. Food ran short. The surrounding countryside had been stripped of supplies. The defenders resisted, and the army that had made Maximinus emperor began to blame him for its suffering. Soldiers entered his camp in the middle of the day and killed him beside his son. Their heads were sent to Rome as proof that the threat was over. Caligula had died in a palace passage. Domitian had died in his bedroom. Caracalla had died beside a road. Maximinus died, surrounded by the army that was supposed to be the foundation of his power. The details of these stories are not equally reliable. Claudius may not have been poisoned. Nero was not murdered. The reputations of Caligula, Domitian, Commodus, and Elagabalus were shaped by writers who disliked them and often wrote after their deaths. But the larger pattern is difficult to miss. Rome did not murder emperors because it had a system for removing tyrants. It murdered them because it had no reliable system for replacing them. The Senate could condemn a ruler, but rarely control the soldiers. The Praetorian Guard could kill an emperor, but could not make the provinces accept its choice. Legions could raise their commanders to the throne, then abandon them when pay, food, or victory disappeared. Every assassination promised a solution. Almost every assassination created a succession crisis. And the emperor's greatest danger was rarely the enemy beyond Rome's borders. It was intimacy, the person carrying the cup, the servant controlling the bedroom, the guard waiting in the corridor, the officer standing close enough to strike when everyone else stepped away. An emperor could command 30 legions, but he could never watch every hand around him. In Rome, becoming emperor made a man almost untouchable. It also placed a target on his back.